Martin Caldwell, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat in his navy blue BMW, tapping his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. The summer sun blazed over the small Texan highway, and though the air conditioning was on full blast, it did little to cool the air inside the car. A retired investment tycoon, Martin was accustomed to everything going smoothly. But today, a flat tire had left him stranded far from the comfort of his expansive ranch home on the edge of San Marcos. Frustrated, Martin had tried calling for roadside assistance, but the weak signal thwarted every attempt. With a deep sigh, he accepted he'd have to wait. Just then, a boy appeared in the distance, walking along the road. He looked to be about 14, wearing a faded flannel shirt and scuffed-up sneakers, his dusty cap pulled low over his eyes. The boy approached the car, his curious gaze sweeping over the vehicle before resting on Martin. His expression was calm but focused. "Got car trouble?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of the local drawl. "Flat tire," Martin replied, waving toward the offending wheel. "No cell service and no help in sight." The boy nodded, his face breaking into an easy smile. "I can fix that for you, sir. Do you have a spare?" "In the trunk," Martin said, gesturing toward the back of the car. Without hesitation, the boy opened the trunk and began pulling out the tools and spare tire. He moved with a quiet confidence, his hands steady as he knelt beside the wheel. Martin watched in silence, feeling oddly humbled. He wasn't used to needing help, especially from someone so young. After about 10 minutes, the boy stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "All set," he said with a nod. Martin reached into his wallet, pulling out several bills. "Here, take this. It's the least I can do to thank you." The boy held up a hand, smiling politely. "No, sir. That's not necessary. Just glad I could help." Before Martin could insist, the boy turned and began walking back the way he came. Martin stood there, stunned, as the boy disappeared down the dusty road. Climbing back into his car, he found himself glancing in the rearview mirror until the boy was out of sight. That evening, Martin sat in his study, a glass of bourbon in hand, surrounded by shelves filled with leather-bound books he rarely touched. The grand room was silent except for the steady ticking of an antique clock. His mind, however, was far from still. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, his quiet confidence, his refusal to accept money, and the unassuming way he'd walked away. Martin had spent decades dealing with people whose every action came with a price tag. But this boy had helped him out of pure goodwill. The thought stirred something unfamiliar within him, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. The next morning, Martin decided to find the boy. After asking around at a gas station and a few diners, he learned from a local mechanic about a young man named Jake who lived with his mother a few towns over in Harmony Springs. Armed with this information, Martin set out on the hour-long drive, his curiosity growing with each mile. Harmony Springs was a quiet town with a few small shops, modest homes, and a slower pace of life. Following the directions he'd been given, Martin found himself in front of a small, weathered house on the outskirts of town. The yard was tidy but simple, with a chicken coop in one corner and a half-repaired fence along the side. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the front door. A woman in her 40s opened it, her face kind but weary. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone cautious but polite. "I believe I met your son yesterday," Martin began. "He helped me with a flat tire. I wanted to thank him properly." The woman's expression softened. "That sounds like Jake," she said, smiling faintly. "He's always helping people around here. He's out back. You're welcome to wait here, or you can go see him." Martin stepped inside, glancing around the modest living room. The furniture was well-worn but clean, and the walls displayed family photos and a few awards, likely Jake's school achievements. It was a stark contrast to Martin's own home, but it felt warm in a way his didn't. Out in the backyard, Jake was hammering a board onto the fence. He looked up, surprised when he saw Martin approaching. "Hey there, mister," Jake said with a grin. "What brings you here?" Martin chuckled softly, suddenly feeling out of place. "I couldn't stop thinking about how you helped me yesterday. I wanted to thank you again." Jake shrugged, leaning on the hammer. "It wasn't a big deal, but to Martin it was." He gestured toward the fence. "You're a hard worker. Your mother must be proud. Jake smiled, glancing toward the house. She works harder than me. I just try to help out where I can. Martin nodded, studying the boy. There was an integrity in Jake's words and actions that struck a chord deep within him. As he left that day, Martin couldn't help but feel that meeting Jake had changed something in him, a subtle but profound shift in how he saw the world. Martin stood silently in the yard, taking in the boy's words. For a moment, his mind drifted back to his own childhood in a modest house much like this one. His parents had worked endlessly, teaching him the value of grit and determination. Over the years, those lessons had faded, overshadowed by his relentless pursuit of wealth and recognition. But now, in this quiet yard filled with warmth and honesty, Martin felt a pang of longing for something he'd lost along the way. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Martin said finally, his voice steady. Jake straightened, his expression uncertain. "We're fine, mister. We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Martin replied. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Jake could answer, his mother stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on a towel. "Jake, come wash up for lunch," she called, then turned to Martin with a kind smile. "Would you like to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to stay." And used to such straightforward hospitality, Martin hesitated. But something about her sincerity left no room for refusal. "I'd love to," he said, following her into the house. Inside, the air smelled of baked bread and roasted chicken. The small kitchen was neat and inviting, the table set with mismatched plates and glasses. As Martin took a seat, he felt uncharacteristically self-conscious in his pressed shirt and expensive watch. Jake quickly washed up and joined them, his youthful grin lighting up the room. As they ate, Martin found himself drawn into their world. Jake spoke animatedly about his dreams of becoming an architect, sharing stories of building makeshift forts in the woods and sketching bridges in his notebook. His mother chimed in with tales of their close-knit community and the support they gave each other in tough times. Martin listened, captivated by the genuine connection they shared. For all his riches, his own sprawling home felt pale in comparison to the life buzzing within these walls. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Martin turned to Jake's mother with admiration in his voice. "You've raised an exceptional young man," he said. "He's thoughtful, hardworking, and full of heart." Her smile widened, though her eyes glistened with emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We've had our challenges, but I've always told him to focus on the good, to find joy in small blessings." Martin left that day with an idea forming in his mind. He had come to thank Jake, but the boy and his family had given him something far greater, a reminder of what truly mattered. Driving back to his estate, Martin resolved to act. This wasn't about charity or pity. It was about honoring their resilience and the lesson they'd unknowingly taught him. The next week brought a flurry of activity to Jake's home. Trucks arrived with supplies, and workers began repairing the house under Martin's careful direction. The porch was rebuilt, the roof replaced, and the yard cleaned up. Inside, the kitchen was updated, and fresh paint breathed new life into every room. At first, Jake and his mother were overwhelmed. "You really didn't need to do all this," she said, her voice breaking as she watched the renovations unfold. Martin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is the least I can do," he said. "You reminded me what life is really about. Let me give back." Jake, ever curious, couldn't resist helping out. He shadowed the crew, asking about tools, techniques, and materials. One of the workers, a gruff but good-natured foreman, began teaching him how to measure beams and mix concrete. Jake soaked it all up, his excitement contagious. Martin watched from a distance, a rare warmth spreading through him. Seeing the boy's enthusiasm gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in decades. Weeks later, the project was complete. The house stood transformed, a sturdy new porch, fresh siding, and a gleaming roof. Inside, the kitchen sparkled, and the worn furniture had been replaced with comfortable, durable pieces. Jake's favorite addition, though, was the swing set in the backyard, a gift from Martin to celebrate his hard work. As neighbors gathered to admire the changes, Jake's mother turned to Martin, her eyes shining. "This isn't just a house anymore. It's a home," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We can never thank you enough." Martin shook his head, humbled. "You've already thanked me," he said. "You showed me what it means to truly care, to truly connect. That's worth more than anything I've ever earned." Jake grinned up at him. "You know, Mr. Martin, I think I'd like to do something like this one day. Help people, build things, make a difference." Martin placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice steady. "You're already making a difference, Jake. Never stop being the person you are." As the evening sky turned golden, Martin stood on the new porch, sipping sweet tea and watching Jake play with his friends. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. His life had been full of achievements, but none compared to the joy of giving and the simple, unfiltered connection he'd found in this small, quiet town. It wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of something greater.